Hey everyone, welcome back to another deck guide. Recently I enjoyed playing Arjun and Spike a lot. They got some really cool additions in Triable Frost and I sleeved up the deck and fell in love with it, how the deck was playing. In this video I will show you what I got and what the general tactics are if you want to play this as well. But first, let's look at our hero. Arjun and Spike let you tap the hero once a turn to discard a card from your reserve to give anchor to the next character you play with a hand cost 3 or less, effectively letting a good character stay on board for 2 turns for the cost of a card from your reserve. First thought, this might not look valuable enough, but if you've got some good characters that have noon abilities, they will trigger only if they stay on board at night and are there at noon the next day. Therefore, you want them to have anchored. Also, having a character already on the board means you get to start ahead without paying the mana. Characters with good Dusk abilities are able to proc them twice, as they see 2 Dusks of 2 different days. This might result in a chain where you can anchor multiple characters a turn with Arjun's ability and the other cards, helping you with both expeditions multiple times. But beware, anchor characters don't go to reserve at night, so you will find that your reserve will be empty a lot of the times, so you need cards that resupply that help you going, because Arjun needs cards in reserve. Our first core pick is Inari. Drawing a card at noon is very good. As we discard a lot of cards from reserve and therefore losing card advantage, Inari helps us to negate some of this disadvantage from Arjun's ability. We have several ways of anchoring next to Arjun, and if Inari is already on the field, it is not a hard choice to re-anchor it and draw again the next turn. Inari is one of the best cards in the deck, only disadvantage is the one in Mountain. That's not always ideal. Every time your opponent draws or resupplies, you can create a 1/1 Orders Recruit token, so anchoring Quetzalcoatl is a very good idea to at least get 1 token at the start of your opponent's day as he is drawing a card. Against Sven, this card is probably the best you can anchor, as you can create 2 tokens due to the way she draws and resupplies. With Repotter Otter and the Daughter of Yggdrasil, you can make opponents draw a card and create a token afterwards. It is also very good against when opponents tend to run a lot of draw or resupply. Muna doesn't have a lot of ways to control the game like sabotaging. Exhausting cards from reserve is as close as Muna gets. Dongda Shen does exactly that at noon. Anchoring this means you can stop an opponent from playing a card. If you are able to re-anchor him, you can stop a card from being played at all. If your opponent's reserve is getting overflowed, they must discard at midnight, leaving you with some card advantage. We run 2 copies of it. Repotter Otter. This card is very useful. If you don't have anything in reserve, Arjun cannot anchor a character. With this Otter, you can put a card in reserve to draw a card. You can put any card in reserve to anchor with Arjun, or you can put a Mona Druid to anchor if you already used Arjun's ability. Note that your opponent can also do the same. If you have a Quetzalcoatl out, they draw a card, but you can create a token. We only run 2 copies as we don't want to draw it too often. Our last rare character is Aloe Vera. We are running 3 copies of this plant. If you don't have mana to spend, you can use Arjun's ability to anchor it. If you do have 1 mana to spend or no cards in reserve, you can anchor it without using Arjun's ability. Or if you already tapped Arjun, this can be the second character you can anchor. This card sets up perfectly for your next Arjun's triggered next turn, as it resupplies at noon. If you are the first player, you always have a card in reserve to use Arjun, and if you are second, hope you don't get sabotaged. We run 3 copies of Muna Druid. This card is excellent to re-anchor a character already on the field. Arjun's ability can only be used on cards you play and not on characters already on the field and only once a turn. But with Muna Druid you can re-anchor something that's already there. He can also make sure you can anchor another character on the field after using Arjun. It's a very flexible card. Jack Frost is here for a little more control, just like Dongda Shen, and for the mana curve. I always discard this card in reserve for Arjun's ability. Not much to say more about this card. The Daughter of Yggdrasil can be very good when resupplied or used to activate our other's ability as your opponent doesn't draw a card. It has a high stats in Forest and in Mountain, so anchor it from reserve makes sure you have a lot of stats in the upcoming 2 days, it's there. The draw can also be used to create a Quetzalcoatl token. The last character in the deck is the Muna Merchant. This card will be replaced by my uniques as soon as I got some very good and interesting ones. It is a 2 cost that we need and is a resupply from reserve, which can be good sometimes. Overall the card is not great, but it's good enough to fill in the unique slots if you don't have any. Then our spells. The first one is absolutely one of the core cards in the deck, Harvest. Not having anything in your reserve to start the anchoring is harsh. This card makes sure you will have at least 3 cards to choose from. The 2 cards that it resupplies and of course itself. This card is so good and so important that I might try to add a third copy of the rare, as I only run 2 now. The common is still very good. This card makes sure you have enough steam for a few turns to use Arjun's ability, as it can also be cast from reserve to get another 1 or 2 cards. Also, if your opponent uses Sabotage a lot, they get 3 more cards to pick from and makes it harder for them to choose the correct target. And after the Sabotage you will still have 1 or 2 cards left. I dare to say, without this card at the moment this deck will not run smoothly. I play 2 removal spells, Beauty Sleep and Lost in the Woods. Beauty Sleep has proven itself time and time again, as it turns out that a 1 mana sleeper target is a very good to close out games. The new spell Lost in the Woods is a flexible one. You can discard a permanent, which will probably have plenty of targets. And you can also choose to send a character in forest to reserve. I think this effect is much better in a Rin than in Arjun, but I think it's still worth running. I can see why people would run Mana Reaping over Lost in the Woods, as it's more flexible, and I have lost some games where the target I needed to remove was not in forest. But I also have won some games where my opponent needed the mana, so it's a very close call and one of your own preference. Meditation Training is here to re-anchor characters over and over again, just like the Muna Druid. If you finally have that 3 cost character down and you do not want to let it go, re-anchor it. It is a good strategy, specifically if you also have Floral Tent in the lane still. It is specifically handy to not have to discard something from reserve to anchor a character. And this way you can keep the double anchor or sometimes even triple anchor on the expedition. Floral Tent is here to protect our anchored characters from removal. As one of our main focuses is anchoring characters, it will be a waste to see our cards being removed, losing us that card advantage, as that is already happening by using Arjun's ability in the first place. Floral Tent will make sure that if characters in this expedition will be removed, it will lose anchor instead. It still hurts a lot when we have a lot of things that will trigger at noon, but still means that the character needs to move twice to get away from the expedition stone and losing its stats. Not only does it protect your anchored characters, it also resupplies on play from everywhere. This is a very nice turn 2 play where you resupply and use Arjun with the supplied card to put your character in the same side as the tent to make sure it stays on board. For the uniques, I will put out one of the Dogger of Yggdrasil's or Jack Frost's and both Muna Merchants, as these commons are filler cards for a deck without uniques. Firstly, I would look for At Dusk anchor effects, or those very good unique cards that anchor multiple characters a turn. These are highly sought after and are very good for this deck type as well. Lastly, uniques that let us do something at dusk or at noon, specifically 3 cost or lower, are very well desired. These cards can be anchored to make sure it will trigger once at noon or twice at dusk. Otherwise, cards that let you draw or resupply when played can also be very good. Esmeralda and Muna Merchant are 2 named characters that always have the resupply ability, and some of those are really good and fitting in this deck. For the strategy, I play this deck as a mid-range deck. This means that the first 2 turns will probably be a setup, and afterwards I will try to use Arjun and other anchoring cards to have almost 1 or 2 characters to stay up in the night. I try to control the reserve by exhausting my opponent's cards, and if my cards will be exhausted, I use Arjun's ability to give them anchor, as that is still possible. In the early game, a good turn 1 play would be Repot the Otter. With this card, you can put Dot of Yggdrasil to reserve, and then you are able to play your next turn with anchoring by discarding the Otter, so you don't have the drawback of giving your opponent a card. The 2 other cards I like to put in the reserve with the Otter are Muna Druid and Muna Merchant. The Druid can give anchor to a character next to Arjun's ability to pressure the opponent even more for 2 days, or can directly be used to anchor the Otter, which is very handy, turn 1. and the merchant can resupply itself if you are looking for a specific answer or character. At turn 1, you can also play Floral Tent and the Muna Merchant together. You can probably win an expedition if you play the tent to see where your opponent is doing and already have a resupply available. Just make sure you don't play the merchant next to the tent if you are going to win, as you will overflow your reserve from the start. Tent will not go to reserve if you don't win the expedition. Having a resupplied card and a Muna Merchant in reserve at start of turn 2 makes sure you can always start anchoring next to your tent. In this play, make sure you get out of the gates quite easy and start anchoring as soon as turn 2. From turn 2 and onwards, you will have your rare 3 character slots to look for. These cards are all tremendous advantage the longer they stay in play. Aloe Vera can anchor itself on turn 2, which can be a very good play after your turn 1 anchored pottered. As you don't have anything in reserve after the turn, the plant can anchor itself for 1 mana and you are still good to go. These 4 characters will be good the entire game and are our main focus to get anchored. Floral Tent makes sure that we get the resupply we need and gives some form of protection. Try to set it up like you can maximize the value of the tent. Don't waste any resupplies and tents that go back to reserve. As the deck heavily relies on anchored characters to stay on board, note that tent only costs 1 mana and can be played to see what your opponent is doing before you play a character with Arjun's ability. Meditation training really helps on that part. It has 2 uses of anchoring, so if you already have a character on the board, you can let it stay for an additional 2 days. This is very good when an army drawing you cards or Aloe Vera for getting those resupplies. Against Venom Crowbar, it's also very useful to use on the Quetzalcoatl. Muna does not have a lot of sabotage effects, but we do get Jack Frost and Dong Shen. Both can exhaust a card in reserve so that opponents cannot use them or discard them from their support ability. This way you stop the opponent from using all their resources, and if you are lucky, they need to discard a card from overflowing their reserve at the end of the turn. Jack Frost is my primary target to use for Arjun's ability, as the common only exhausts from hand and is from reserve not that strong, but it's still a character that can be played if needed. Harvest enables you to dig for options and can be played to use one of the cards as discard to anchor. If you are lucky enough, you get a Muna Druid and another character. You could then play the character with Arjun's ability and use the Druid to anchor the one already on the field from last turn, letting you still have the Harvest in reserve to play the next turn again. This card has so many possibilities, it is criminal. Yeah, I prefer to never let this card go into the mana, except if I draw both an opening hand or draw one while I already have one in my hand. But then, still it's a hard decision to let it go, it is that powerful. The only late game card I want to talk about is Beauty Sleep. This card can win you an expedition by sleeping one of your opponent's characters. If you are not winning the game, it is still useful to sleep a target, as you are probably anchoring 1 or 2 characters yourself. This way you will probably are not far behind. This concludes my strategy and deck guide. This is my complete list. For the uniques, I would change one of the Daughter of Yggdrasil or Jack Frost or both Muna Merchants. And you can change Lost in the Woods to Mana Reaping without much trouble. Thanks again for watching this deck guide. I've had a lot of joy playing Arjun and Spike with this list and I hope you will do too. If you like this video, help me out with subscribing to my channel or put a like on the video. I have some ideas for new deck guides, but let me know in the comments which hero you are excited to play and which I should look into next. I am the Bravos Hatter and I hope to see you again.